Welcome to episode 285 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Tom Simon, who served in the FBI for 26 years. In this episode, Tom reviews his investigation of Las Vegas couple Perry and Rochelle Griggs for orchestrating a prison Ponzi scheme. While serving 8 years in federal prison for security fraud, Perry Griggs started another scam where fellow prisoners and their families were the victims. When Griggs was paroled, he and his wife disappeared, and a national fugitive manhunt ensued, resulting in their arrest and conviction. CNBC featured this prison Ponzi scheme case on American Greed. Tom Simon was initially assigned to the Chicago division. This case was investigated when he was reassigned to the Honolulu division. He spent most of his time in Chicago and Honolulu investigating financial crimes with an expertise in investment fraud and embezzlement schemes. He was also assigned as a part-time media spokesman for both field offices. Later in his career, Tom transferred to the Jacksonville Division in Florida, where he was assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, and also worked on a human intelligence squad, recruiting and handling confidential human sources in the fields of terrorism and investment fraud. He ended his career in Jacksonville, serving on the financial crime team, managing a caseload of white-collar crimes. Since retiring, Tom Simon has been operating his own private investigation agency, Simon Worldwide Investigations, focusing on embezzlements and fraud investigations, security consulting for corporate clients, sensitive personal matters, and expert witness testimony. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to let you know that my April email to Reader Team members is out. If it's not in your inbox, you know what to do. Check your spam filter and promotions tab. Reader Team members are listeners who love true crime, but also want to talk about crime fiction. This month in my email, I share an announcement about my next crime novel, list my event schedule for Thriller Fest, including some exciting news about what best-selling author I get to interview on the Thriller Fest stage in New York. Plus, I review the #1 Netflix hit series, The Night Agent, for FBI policy and procedure accuracy. You may be surprised to hear what I think about the show. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Tom Simon. Hey, Tom.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
I got to know you or find out about you from your wonderful videos on TikTok, all about some of the cases that you worked in the FBI and educational talks that you have on the FBI. So once I saw those, I thought, oh, you know what? This will be a guy who knows his way behind the microphone. I definitely wanted to have you on the show. So welcome.
Well, thanks. It's so good to be here. And I'm such a fan of your show. I'm really honored to be on here.
Oh, thank you. We'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing now and your really cool TikTok videos at the end. But my format is to get right to the case review. Now, we both worked economic crimes. As everybody knows, I love the case reviews that have to do with fraud and con men and embezzlement. You have a really interesting case to talk to us today because some of the victims were, well, different. Where do you want to start?
I think it's best to start in 2010. I was working at the FBI office in Honolulu, and during that same week in January 2010, 3 complaints came into the FBI office in Honolulu with people saying that they had invested their life savings with a man in federal prison named Perry Griggs. Obviously, my question is, why on earth would anyone invest money with someone who was sitting in federal prison? I also received a call from a family on the windward side of Oahu who had invested their life savings with a flight attendant named Kapua, who was now blaming this inmate, Perry Griggs, for the loss of their investment money. And then I received a phone call from Kapua Keolanui, who wanted to tell me the bad thing she had done while under the spell of this inmate, Perry Griggs. So I think maybe it's best to flash back and fill you in on who this guy Perry Griggs was and how he came to defraud all of these people while being inside the prison walls. Perry was a lifelong con artist who'd been in and out of prison throughout his entire adulthood. During one stint in prison out west, a local church lady would visit the inmates to minister to them. This church lady brought her 17-year-old daughter with her on these ministry trips, and her name was Rochelle. Inmate Perry and teenage Rochelle fell in love and eventually married after Perry was released from prison. They ended up in California, and Perry made a go at it installing flooring. He loved Rochelle and wanted to provide for her. The problem was that he wasn't much good at anything other than scams. Floor installations were not paying the bills. So he started an investment fraud scheme and ripped off a bunch of people. The U.S. Secret Service investigated that. Perry pleaded guilty, and I think he was sentenced to like 7 years in prison. At the time, there was a federal prison camp on Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, where Perry served his time. Rochelle moved to Las Vegas to be near him, and this is really where my story and my case begins.
Let me ask you a question. The very first time he was in jail, when he met his future wife, why was he in jail?
It was a state prison, some kind of low-level check fraud, probably check kiting or something like that. This was like 20 years earlier, so I don't mean to make it seem as if these things were bang, bang, bang right after another. But Perry was always in and out of prison for bad check stuff, white-collar crimes. I don't think he ever stuck a gun in anyone's ear to rip them off. He was a scammer. That's all he did.
As we both know, that's sometimes even worse than having a gun stuck in your head, because when you lose your life savings, that's financial violence. I mean, you're ruined.
Totally. And from a criminal perspective, the cost benefits there, because you're going to do a lot less time and get a lot more money if you do a fraud versus, again, robbing a liquor store or a bank.
Yeah. Why doesn't the criminals wise up to that?
Well, if they listen to your podcast, we may see an uptick in these white collar crimes now that they're getting all this great advice as far as how to do it from you and I.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Where were you?
Perry gets to Nellis Federal Prison in Las Vegas, and he finds himself serving time with about 100 federal inmates from Hawaii who were doing their time in Las Vegas. The locals in Hawaii love Las Vegas, and they all request to do their time there so family members can visit them during their regular trips to play the slot machines. Perry quickly ingratiated himself with the Hawaii prisoners and became part of their group. So, Jerry, we're all familiar with that scene in the movies where the prisoners ask each other, what are you in for? But the reality is that doesn't happen much. In real prison, it's considered to be real disrespectful to ask a fellow prisoner about their crimes. Prisoners talk about everything with each other, movies, music, family, home life, but they mostly don't want to talk about that one unfortunate event in their lives that landed them in prison in the first place. As a result, prisoners are free to create their own legends and reinvent their histories while serving time. Perry took advantage of this by telling the Hawaii prisoners that he was a multi-millionaire commodities trader who was serving time for tax and money laundering offenses. And these 100 inmates from Hawaii were so impressed by Perry. These were guys who had never met a millionaire before, and Perry played the role perfectly. He told them stories of his cars and his mansions. They saw that he subscribed to magazines in prison like Forbes, Cigar Aficionado, and the Robb Report for the affluent lifestyle. More importantly, Perry told them that he had $20 million in assets under management, other people's money that he was investing for clients from inside the prison walls. Now, the question is, how could that be? Why was this claim credible at all to the Hawaii prisoners? It was because Perry had special privileges inside Nellis Prison. He had that place wired. The prisoners were assigned to work crews supervised by Air Force personnel who worked on the base. Perry was assigned a construction crew renovating a warehouse.
Had he done something like this before? Did he have experience in construction?
Again, he was a flooring guy, right? But again, a lot of this stuff's just demolition, carrying drywall up and down the stairs, stuff like that. I mean, I couldn't build a birdhouse, but I worked construction when I was a teenager because they need people like that to haul the drywall up and down the stairs, stuff like that. Perry's work crew supervisor believed Perry's legend story, hook, line, and sinker, and looked the other way when Rochelle would deliver Perry forbidden gourmet food, a cell phone, and a laptop with wireless internet access for Perry to use when he was supposed to be working at the warehouse. The warehouse became an office space for Perry's investment business while he was incarcerated. And he wasn't going to let a small thing like incarceration stop him from living like a king. His prison work crew supervisor took such a liking to Perry that he periodically snuck Perry off the prison grounds to a nearby motel where Rochelle would be waiting for him for a quick date. He wasn't going to let prison get in the way of his sex life.
This is unbelievable. Was the supervisor, the prison supervisor, was he getting something, or at least a promise of something? I mean,
well, keep in mind what happens when you're in the work crew. There's the prison on the Air Force base. And so you're being handed off to like Air Force people who are going to be supervising you during the course of your work crew time.
Okay. So he wasn't a correction officer.
Stay tuned. We have some corrupt corrections officers I'll tell you about later. You're jumping ahead, Jerry. let me tease your listeners a little bit.
But this is just mind-boggling to me. I know it happens, but not to this extent. And I'm still wondering what this Air Force supervisor, he must have been promised something. He couldn't have just done it because Perry was such a nice guy.
Yeah, but you and I live in the world of proof, and it was hard for me to establish that, right?
Okay.
So the other inmates were in awe of Perry. They all knew he was getting these unauthorized conjugal field trips and that he had a cell phone and an internet-enabled laptop computer while he was locked up. Let's jump forward to September 2005. Perry tells the Hawaii prisoners how much he values their friendship and that they have touched him and filled him with the aloha spirit. And he said to them, "I understand how difficult it must be for your families back in Hawaii with you locked up on the mainland. Let me help you." Perry said that he was so filled with the aloha spirit that he and Rochelle had formed a new company called Aloha Trading, and that he'd be willing to invest their money in the commodities markets to help their family members back home. The plan was for Rochelle to handle the cash while Perry would place the commodities trade from inside the prison walls using his contraband cell phone and laptop. The idea of helping their family members back home was very attractive to the Hawaii prisoners. But there was one problem. There was no money back home. These people came from humble backgrounds, and their family members were mostly broke. But that wasn't going to stop Perry. He had a plan. From talking to the Hawaii prisoners, Perry knew that many of them had houses that had been in their families for generations, and the families were living basically mortgage-free. Perry encouraged them to get cash-out mortgages on the value of their Hawaii homes and then invest that cash with Perry, where he would make profitable commodities trades from inside the prison walls. Perry promised the Hawaii prisoners that he would take the cash from their families' home equity loans and trade commodities with the money. Rochelle would use those profits to pay the monthly mortgage payments for 5 years. At the conclusion of the 5 years, they would use the investment proceeds to pay off the mortgages and then give the prisoners' families lump sums of $1 to $3 million.
Ding, ding, ding. Like a bell is going off. It's like, what?
He'd have to be a very good commodities trader. But again, that's his cover, right? He's telling them he's really good at this. Other investors were told that Perry would just trade their money and triple it over a short period of time. Some of the investors back home had sizable mortgages already on their homes, and Perry had them use every bit of the remaining equity to get every last drop of cash out of those houses. In turn, Perry and Rochelle promised that they would take care of the mortgage payments every month. That type of financial security was unheard of for many of these prisoners who got on the phone to their family members to break the news that our ships had come in. And after that, the money started flowing into Rochelle's Aloha Trading bank account. And for a while, Rochelle made the monthly mortgage payments for her victims, creating the illusion of investment returns. What her victims didn't know is that these returns were not derived from any legitimate investment activities like commodities trading profits, but they were coming from the principal investments of other people. In other words, it was a Ponzi scheme. Now, Perry and Rochelle took in about $3 million from this scheme. And in their defense, Perry used about $750,000 of the money to trade commodities from prison. And he lost it all immediately. He was a disaster. It turns out, Jerry, trading commodities is very hard.
Oh.
Remember, this was a guy who, when he made a legitimate living, he installed tile floors. He knew nothing about commodities. So it was unsurprising that when he started trying to make trades, it was just a financial fiasco.
And I don't even understand why he tried. I mean, he could have just told them that he was and not do it.
I think a lot of these guys have an inflated view of their own intelligence. Perry was certainly one of these guys. From that point on, this thing became nothing but a Ponzi scheme. New investors were needed for Rochelle to pay the promised returns to the old investors. But there was no actual investing going on here. They were just robbing Peter to pay Paul after a while. The problem, though, is that Perry and Rochelle were running out of Hawaii prisoners who also had family members willing to invest with a man sitting in federal prison. But eventually their prayers were answered in the form of a Hawaiian woman named Kapua Keolanui. Let me talk a little bit about Kapua. One of the 100 Hawaii inmates serving time with Perry Griggs had a wife named Kapua Keolanui, who was able to visit Las Vegas regularly due to her job as a flight attendant. By way of background, Kapua was a graduate of Kamehameha School, a highly regarded private school for students with Native Hawaiian ancestry. And as an adult, she worked as a flight attendant for one of the local Hawaii airlines, and she spent her free time raising her kids. Kapua met Rochelle during family visitations in Las Vegas, and they struck up a friendship. Kapua ended up renting a room from Rochelle to make her visits to Las Vegas easier. Rochelle knew the ropes of being a prisoner's wife and took Kapua under her wing. Eventually, Rochelle brought up the idea of forming a business partnership together with Kapua, and Kapua took the bait. I have to say, Kapua was a very nice woman. Everyone loved her. She was the last person in the world you'd ever expect to get involved in a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Kapua was also a very religious woman. Whenever she'd get together with Perry and Rochelle during the prison visitations, they would join hands and pray to Jesus as a group. Perry and Rochelle knew exactly how to play Kapua and exploit her vulnerabilities as a religious Christian. With the encouragement of Perry and Rochelle, Kapua went to the homes of several friends and family members and told them that she had been touched by Jesus Christ himself, who had given her the power to trade commodities and generate high profits.
She was serious? I mean, she really thought this, or was she taken up in the scam?
She felt that Jesus brought Perry and Rochelle into her life, but she left out a very important piece of information as she was talking to her intended victims. She did not tell them that this money was going to be traded by a prisoner in jail for fraud. She told them that she and Jesus were going to be trading the money.
And they went for that one too.
Hang in there, Jerry. I got this.
I know, but this is wild. I'm listening to this. And again, I try not to do the victim. I just think to myself, what? But again, both you and I are educated and we have an expertise and lots of experience in these things. Sometimes I forget that there are people who are looking to be rescued. And when they hear something like this, it gives me concern, but it gives them hope.
I think you learn early as an FBI agent working investment frauds and advanced fee schemes that you got to set the stupidity of the victims aside and understand that even dumb people, you're not allowed to rip them off. If we're looking for righteous and intelligent victims, you're not going to find them much. It's like stealing candy from a baby. You still shouldn't do that because they're babies.
And these people are desperate. I think that's why I really got into the work that I did. Because again, I thought people were gullible. But my victims usually were people that did what they did because they were desperate. They needed the money. They had a business that was failing and they were trying to get a loan to keep it afloat, or had hope. They wanted to do more for their families. And that's why they fell for these schemes. But usually the people who lost the most money were people who couldn't afford to do so.
I think also that some people just don't have financial sophistication. I mean, you and I do because of our backgrounds. I can't fix a car. I can't change the oil of a car. I don't know how any of that stuff works. I push the button and hopefully my car starts. So they could look at me and talk about how stupid I am about car stuff. Perhaps it's unfair for me to take a look at them and say how stupid they are about financial stuff. It's just not their thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
So Kapua wanted to share this blessing with her loved ones, and she told the potential investors that with the help of Jesus Christ, that she had been having tremendous success at trading commodities, and she wanted to share this blessing with them. The truth, of course, is that Kapua had never made a commodities trade in her life. Kapua and Rochelle formed a company called Paradise Trading that would handle the money from Kapua's investors. Kapua's friends and family members invested a total of about $1 million, most of which was transferred right into the hands of Perry and Rochelle Griggs, ostensibly for Perry to trade the money in the commodities markets, so Kapua could meet her obligations to her investors. Unfortunately, Kapua neglected to tell her investors that her silent partner was not, in fact, Jesus, but a man sitting in federal prison running a fraud scheme. In her defense, Kapua was a true believer in Perry and Rochelle's story that they could help people using Perry's commodities trading skills. But she also understood that telling her clients that she was giving their life savings to a man in prison might have a chilling effect on their willingness to invest. Kapua wasn't really living large on the money she took from the victims. Most of it went to the Griggs. Now, Kapua did start some harebrained businesses, including buying gambling machines for Waikiki bars and a dump truck for a family member, but none of these ventures were particularly profitable. In 2005, the Bureau of Prisons transferred Perry to La Tuna Prison near El Paso, Texas. This was bad news for Perry because the sweet life he'd built for himself in the Nevada prison instantly went away. Suddenly, Perry was just another average Joe in an orange jumpsuit.
Is that why they did it? Were they aware of the sweet deal he had in Vegas and thought, no, we got to end this. We got to stop it?
I don't get that impression. I think oftentimes prisoners are just sort of, especially in the work camps, sort of churned from prison to prison. I don't know at this point. I had no evidence to indicate that the Bureau of Prisons had been turned on to the fact that Perry was living large and violating the rules. I just don't know that. Because La Tuna was a work camp, Perry quickly got a job cleaning offices at the nearby military base there. Perry got to know the civilian cleaning ladies on the base, and he eventually had Rochelle give them cash bribes in exchange for smuggling Perry food, cigars, and of course a cell phone. Basically, Perry was back in business. In 2007, the Bureau of Prisons transfers Perry again, this time to Lompoc Federal Prison in California. At the time, the Bureau of Prisons had a program where non-violent prisoners who were not regarded as a flight risk would be released on a temporary furlough and given a Greyhound bus ticket to manage their own transportation from prison to prison. Now, this may sound crazy and risky, but it was actually a good program that saved the taxpayers a ton of money, and it was only available to non-violent inmates who weren't regarded as a flight risk, guys like Perry Griggs. Most prisoners are not going to use this as an opportunity to escape because it would add so much time to their sentence when they eventually get caught. The people on these furloughs were generally white-collar criminals who were serving less than 10 years. You probably could run away, but why create that amount of headaches for yourself? Most of these inmates just want to put their time behind them.
All right, I can see where you're going with this.
Stay tuned.
Our
Buckle
guy
in.
Perry was already doing things that most prisoners don't do, so I can see where you're going with this.
Because he wasn't a violent criminal or considered a flight risk, he qualified for this Bureau of Prisons program. He was given a bus ticket from Texas to California, several bus tickets actually, because he got a transfer, and he was released on furlough to self-report to his new prison home in a few days. The Bureau of Prisons, in their defense, did not regard this program as a vacation. There was literally no fat at all built into the inmate's travel schedule for them to do anything other than ride the bus to the next prison. The bus itineraries were on file with both the sending and the receiving prison, and if a prisoner was late to report, they got into a lot of trouble. By the time Perry got his transfer orders from Texas to California, the Griggs were swimming in millions of dollars. The problem was that Perry really couldn't enjoy it because he was locked up. But this prison transfer gave Perry the big opportunity to taste the sweet life. While the Bureau of Prisons was buying Perry his bus ticket from Texas to California, prison to prison, Perry had Rochelle use the investor money to charter a Lear jet for a trip with Rochelle to Las Vegas. The prison van dropped off Perry at the bus station in Texas, and when the coast was clear, Rochelle picked him up and drove him to a private airport where a rented Lear jet was waiting to fly them to Las Vegas. Rochelle was excited to show Perry the larger, nicer house she was renting in Las Vegas with the Aloha Trading money, and they spent a nice weekend enjoying each other's company outside of the prison confines. And as the weekend was coming to a close, the private jet then flew Perry to Santa Barbara, California, where he boarded the Greyhound bus for the last leg of the trip to Lompoc Prison. Of course, the fact that all this fun was happening with the victim money is totally tragic, but I think you have to admire the sheer bravado that Perry showed with that stunt. This guy was no dummy. By the time Perry got to Lompoc Prison, he knew exactly how to continue his life of posh incarceration. Perry got himself assigned to a work crew job off prison grounds and had Rochelle deliver envelopes full of cash to the new work crew boss. In turn, Perry got a cell phone, a laptop, good food, and an occasional case of beer. To keep the goodwill flowing, Rochelle used investor money to make a down payment on a truck for the boss of the new work crew that was supervising Perry. Instead of working his manual labor job on a nearby military base, Perry was permitted to use the construction trailer as an office to scare up new investors and keep existing investors placated with these monthly mortgage payments. And again, Perry was also regularly smuggled to motels where he and Rochelle could enjoy each other's company in private. In September 2008, Perry was released to a halfway house in Las Vegas and eventually to a full release with Rochelle. Now that Perry was a free man, he and Rochelle used investor money to upgrade their Nevada home to a bigger, nicer place, and then another move to another condominium. Meanwhile, new investors weren't coming in the door, and Perry and Rochelle were running out of money. By the fall of 2009, Aloha Trading was flat broke and not making the monthly mortgage payments for their Hawaii investors. Meanwhile, angry inmates from Hawaii were being released from prisons across the nation, only to learn that Perry and Rochelle had not been making the mortgage payments for their families. And then in January 2010, Perry and Rochelle disappear into thin air. No one could find them, and my phone at the Honolulu FBI began to ring, which is where our story began.
In total, how long did he run this scheme before all the money ran out and he ran away?
2005 to 2010. So 5 years
Wow.
of bringing in money and making mortgage payments, which toward the end, he's skipping a month or two of mortgage payments, making partial payments, and they're just burning through the money personally while also using the investor money in a Ponzi scheme to pay the mortgages for the victims.
This is so wild because he is motivated to keep it going because he is locked up with his victims. Normally, when we see these type of schemes going on, of course, the con man, the Ponzi schemer is going to have interactions with his victim, but he's not going to be living with them in the cell next door.
This whole thing was a tremendously risky gambit. And,
oh my God, yeah.
And it could have gone sideways really quickly, but Perry's a very good salesman. So this was an odd case for me because I had two distinctive sets of victims. People who thought they were investing money with Kapua and Jesus, and people who thought they were investing their money with a man who was sitting in federal prison. To her credit, Kapua was quick to admit her own wrongdoing, and she wanted to make this right. So throughout 2010, Kapua made herself available to me at all hours to answer my questions about Perry and Rochelle. And for my part, I spent the year 2010 interviewing victims, interviewing inmates and ex-cons, and pouring through financial records. The fraud became clear to me over time, but the mystery remained. What happened to Perry and Rochelle Griggs? You see, I wasn't spending any time on the manhunt because I was busy building the case. I figured once I got an indictment and an arrest warrant, then I could really focus on finding them and putting handcuffs on them. No small part of me thought it was possible that one of the ex-cons they ripped off caught up to them and they were buried in some circle grave in the Nevada desert. At first, it was puzzling to me why anyone would invest money with someone in prison. But you have to realize that people who have family members who are incarcerated don't have the same dim view of prisoners that you and I have. I asked all the victims why they felt comfortable investing with a prisoner. And many of them were quick to point out that their family member was in federal prison. That's where the smart people go away. It wasn't state prison with the dummies. It was like Junior was social climbing in his life.
That is really fascinating, really fascinating.
So before the Griggs disappeared, they sold their car, they dumped their cell phones, they sold all their furniture, and they closed out every account they had. It was clear to me that they were making a deliberate effort to go off the grid. So in October 2012, a federal grand jury indicted Perry and Rochelle, and the judge issued an arrest warrant. So now it's time for a manhunt. I sent leads to the other FBI field offices, and FBI agents across the nation fanned out and began interviewing the Griggs family members, friends, and men who had served time with Perry. I felt very comfortable from the financial analysis that they had burned through all the money in Vegas, and they definitely weren't living large while on the run. But still, as long as Perry had a mouth, anyone he met was his ATM. He was that good at separating people from their money. Perry was smooth. Right before he disappeared, he walked into a Las Vegas resort's golf pro shop to cancel a tee time, and he walked out with a $20,000 investment from the store manager.
All right, you're going to have to tell us how he did that.
I mean, he's just a smooth talker, right? He gets talking to the manager. He's in there to do a tea time. He starts telling stories about how he's a commodities trader and how he could double people's money real quick. Guy wrote him a check for $20,000 standing there in the shop. Perry walked out, negotiated the check, and hit the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, he's good. He definitely is good.
Right. The FBI arranged for electronic billboards with pictures of Perry and Rochelle to be on highways across America. And for the fall of 2010, my phone was ringing off the hook with well-meaning tips from travelers who swore they saw Perry and Rochelle in all four corners of the U.S. Some people called in tips with the license plates of cars that they thought the Griggs were driving, and I'd run over to the computer and get the photos of the car owners. Inevitably, it'd be a nice-looking couple who didn't look like the Griggs at all. Eyewitnesses mean well, but they're just not trained for this stuff. Now, the crowdsourcing of this manhunt through the billboards did provide 3 useful leads. 1, it seemed that Perry and Rochelle were hiding in Arizona. 2, Perry was working odd jobs to make money. And 3, the biggest one, is we got a phone number, which is a very good lead. The problem is that it was a prepaid disposable burner phone with no billing records that we could exploit. So I used a sophisticated investigative technique that I'm happy to share with your podcast listeners today. I Googled the phone number. And the first thing that popped up was a Craigslist ad from Kingman, Arizona. We'll paint your house for cash. Call this number. And at that point, I knew it was all coming together and we were close. So I set a lead and we dispatched an undercover FBI agent to call the number on the Craigslist ad and hire Perry to paint a business in Kingman, Arizona. Can you come and give us an estimate, was the gist. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but Perry smelled a rat right off the bat and suspected that this job opportunity that we were offering him was too good to be true. So instead of showing up himself, Perry dispatched his landlord to meet with the prospective client, who was actually an undercover FBI agent. Upon arrival, the agents grabbed the guy and questioned him until he gave up the location of the rooming house where Perry and Rochelle were hiding. Agents stormed the house to find an exhausted and emaciated Perry and Rochelle Griggs sitting there. And as the agents were putting the cuffs on Rochelle, Perry said, "Her only crime was loving me too much." Without missing a beat, the arresting agent said, "Well, Perry, that's not a federal crime, so it must be something else." So eventually they were transported to Hawaii to face the charges, and I had an opportunity to interview Perry and Rochelle for hours and hours and hours separately after they were captured. It was clear to me that Perry really loved Rochelle, that he wasn't faking. He wanted to take care of her while he was inside the prison walls, and so he cooked up this crazy scheme solely to support his wife. It would have been sweet if there wasn't so much financial carnage baked into his romantic plan. And for her part, Rochelle lived pretty well off the victim money. She had nice houses, a BMW in Honolulu, and a Cadillac Escalade in Las Vegas. She wore expensive jewelry, and she traveled regularly to visit Kapua in Hawaii and visit Perry as he was bouncing from prison to prison. Hawaii Loa Ridge is probably the most exclusive gated community in the entire state. And for her regular visits to Honolulu, Rochelle rented a house overlooking the ocean with this giant ridge. She had this majestic view. I went to the house. It was so opulent, and it was paid for with victim money. Eventually, Kapua, Rochelle, and Perry all pled guilty to fraud charges and all went to prison. Kapua got 33 months, which was discounted because of her cooperation with me. Rochelle was sentenced to 48 months, and Perry was sentenced to 87 months in federal prison. As the depth of the corruption in the Bureau of Prisons came to light, they weren't going to take any chances with Perry this next stint in prison. He served his time at the Supermax prison in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Oh, wow. That's the same prison that the Oklahoma City bombers stayed in.
I believe John Gotti was there as well at some point.
Wow. That's really surprising.
Because he was so good at talking prison officials and prison contractors into breaking the rules for him and his functional prison escape during the Learjet incident, I think they felt that there was and it was just embarrassing for them, right? And so I figured they weren't going to take any more chances. He ended up becoming regarded as a high-risk prisoner.
Oh, yeah. I'm really pleased that the prison system saw this financial crime guy, this Ponzi schemer, as a serious threat to society. And he really gets the serious treatment or serious prison time. I'm really pleased about that. Surprised, but pleased.
I was too. I never really got myself hung up on the sentencings and where they're serving time in my case. It's not like I get to keep the license plates they make in prison or anything like that. I don't have to serve the time. But for my part, that was pretty much it. I went on to my next case. That's how it all went down, Jerry.
It really is a fascinating case, and it really puts you into the mindset of these con men who have the confidence, that's where con comes from,
exactly,
to do these things. I mean, the audacity of him doing such a crime while serving prison time.
I agree. And I always felt that someone like Perry, who had that gift of gab, should be selling cars, not installing floors or stealing money.
Yeah, good point. I looked up articles on this case, and I'll have the links to those articles in the show notes for anyone who wants to dive a little deeper. And this was an episode on American Greed too, right?
Yeah, the producers of American Greed like to come out to Hawaii and do stories on my cases. And at first I thought it was because I was hot stuff, but then I realized that the production company was in Chicago and they just wanted to come out to Hawaii to film for a week.
Well, I had one of my cases on American Greed and it was in Philadelphia. So I'm not going to let you diminish the fact that this was really just a great case that needed to be highlighted on a show that features con men and people like Perry. So good for you. Of course, I couldn't find the episode. Even my episode, which was way back in 2008, is no longer available. And I couldn't find yours too. I think it was filmed in 2013, unless you have a link to it.
Hulu now is streaming American Greed episodes. I don't know how far back they go. And I know for a while you could buy them for a couple bucks on iTunes, but I don't know how far back they go. It wasn't something I really kept track of much after it aired. Although American Greed's funny because they're constantly cycling through the episodes. And even today, like if you turn on CNBC at random hours, they'll just like throw on an episode of American Greed. Every 3 or 4 years, I get a call from someone who said they're in a hotel and Tom, you're on TV. And I know it was one of my old episodes of American Greed. Not that we get any money out of it, but the gift that keeps giving for CNBC.
Yeah, I get that too. Every now and then somebody will say, I was watching TV and look who came up. It was you on American Greed. So
it sneaks up on you, right? You don't even know when they're doing it.
And it was one of my biggest cases. It was $350 million Ponzi scheme case. So I'm very proud of it and proud of the fact that it caught the attention of American Greed. So talking about TV, I am going to ask you about when and why you joined the FBI. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that we both served as media reps, or spokespersons for the FBI. What made you decide you wanted to get into that?
I was the relief media spokesperson in Chicago. The main guy had been doing it forever, and he was really
I know him very well.
And he was really good at it. Every now and then, the poor guy needed to go on vacation. He wanted people to fill in. So I raised my hand just because I thought it was interesting. I've always enjoyed communications. And I also, this sounds corny, I'm such a believer in the FBI that I really think that getting our story out there to the public is important. The FBI has always kind of had that approach, is that we're doing good out there and we have a story to tell. Why not push those stories out instead of just putting our hands over our face and saying no comment every time someone asks us a question? I really appreciated that approach. And I've always liked the way the FBI handles the media by being transparent and telling our stories.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir because that's exactly how I feel too.
Right. I mean, that's what you're doing here on your show. So I think it's a great thing you're doing as well.
Yeah. And I've always said, I know the FBI is not perfect. I know there are people in the FBI who are not perfect, but I'm going to let some other retired agent talk about that. I think that when those agents do want to talk about shortcomings or things that they believe are wrong in the FBI, that they need to also think about the active agents who are working in the FBI today and show some concern or respect for their ability to do their job. I'm talking about all the great men and women in the FBI and the wonderful cases that we do. That's my role. That's my goal.
Again, I think that's an awesome thing. I think you and I are on the same wavelength as far as the importance of that.
So when you get out to Honolulu, which I have to say is a great gig.
It sure was.
Being an FBI agent is a great gig. Being an FBI agent working in Hawaii has to be the best gig ever.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great. Every day I woke up and it was like driving through a screensaver to get to work. It was wonderful.
But I noticed when I was doing it in Philadelphia, I did it full time. And for the last 5 years in my career, I wasn't working cases. I got to see what everybody else was doing and be involved in listening and decisions made about how to talk about it in the media, but I wasn't working cases. But for you, it sounds like you were doing both.
Yeah, the media stuff's always been a side hustle for me. And so when I got to Honolulu, the media coordinator was an agent there and he was getting ready to leave and he knew I was a relief guy in Chicago. And Hawaii doesn't have a lot of crime. The crime there is just incredibly low. And the Hawaii office of the FBI is really more of a national security office with all the military bases and the proximity to China and all that, that the FCI kind of rules the roost there. And the counterterrorism squads were also big and muscular because they couldn't afford to have a terrorist attack on Hawaii. It would kill the economy overnight. And so the criminal side was understaffed. And because there's not a lot of crime, the cases were more modest. And so the media coordinator job was always held by an agent out there working cases, which is all I ever wanted to do, right? If I had to choose between doing the media stuff and doing cases, I would do cases 10 times out of 10. But Hawaii was a unique opportunity for me to work cases and then do the media stuff as a side hustle. And as a result, that if you were to Google Honolulu FBI during the window of time I was there, you would see a disproportionate amount of cases that were white collar crime cases, because that's what I was doing and that's what I was interested in. And that's the cases that I was most familiar with. I was in the unusual position of kind of hyping my own cases a lot on TV.
Yeah, I did kind of notice that. Why don't we go straight to that standard question of mine, which is when and why you joined the FBI?
I wanted to be an FBI agent since I was a little kid for all the wrong reasons. I thought I would be jumping off of a lot more moving trains and planes than I ever had an opportunity to do. When I was in college, I asked a friend's father what I should major in if I wanted to be an FBI agent, and he said law or accounting. I hated school. I knew that law was an extra 3 years of school, and I found that abhorrent. So I majored in accounting and got pretty good at that. And then I graduated. And everything I did from age 15 on was done with an eye toward being an FBI agent. After I got my degree in accounting, I passed the CPA exam. I went to work for a big firm called KPMG for 3 years. Then when I turned 25, I applied to become an agent as soon as I was legally allowed to do so. And I was lucky enough to get in. So that's sort of how it played out for me.
And you ended up in Jacksonville after being in Chicago and Hawaii.
That's correct. Once I did my time in Hawaii, did 7 years there, I knew I was ruined for cold weather. So the idea of going back to Chicago was just not an option. And an opportunity came to transfer to Jacksonville. And so I jumped on that and eventually found myself back doing white collar crime cases, which is pretty much the length in my career is all I ever really did. And I loved it. They don't hire CPAs because we're fun to be around, Jerry. They hire us because we might have some aptitude to follow money in and out of organizations and do financial crime type investigations. I really, really enjoyed it. And every day of my 26 years there was just fantastic.
All right. So you retired in 2021. What are you doing now?
I'm a private investigator, and most of my clients, most of the big clients, are having me do fraud investigations for them, like companies who have embezzlements or business partner disputes and kind of forensic accounting adjacent type stuff. However, I don't have enough of those clients to pay the bill, so I'm happy to do a lot of surveillances and divorce cases and things like that. And so I'm just really a full service private investigator in Jacksonville with expertise in financial matters. So I hire myself out as a forensic accountant. I do expert witness testimony in civil cases. I'll put together cases and then hand carry them to the FBI because I think I have a knack for putting together a case in a manner that's going to be more sellable to the FBI than just some yahoo walking into the office on complaint duty.
And what's the name of your business?
Simon Worldwide Investigations. My website is simoninvestigations.com.
All right. I'll make sure I put a link to that in the show notes for this episode. I take it that's using your media skills and your knowledge of how to be in front of a camera is why you started doing marketing for your company on TikTok.
I was spending a fortune on marketing when I started out. I was just throwing cash at things that weren't working. Like there's an app called Nextdoor for the neighborhood people and paying for ads there. I was paying a fortune for Google ads. Then at some point I thought, you know what? I have a story to tell. Why not make dumb little 1-minute videos, either telling the story of a case I worked, telling a story of an interesting case that I didn't work, or talking about investigative techniques and stories from the private eye world, and post them on every social media platform, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and just see if I can generate clients from that. And it's worked out wonderfully. I've gotten a bunch of great clients. Quite unexpectedly, I have 55,000 followers on TikTok. And people call me, law firms call me, millionaires call me and say, I saw you on TikTok and I think you're the man for the job. Let's talk. It's been really productive. I have zero interest in being an influencer. I'm an old man. But the idea of being able to tell my story and save a couple bucks on marketing by telling these stories daily in the morning so it shows up in the feed just makes total economic sense for me.
I think it's pretty smart. Of course, as a podcaster, I've been doing this for 7 years, and I definitely want people to listen to the podcast. I also want people to buy and read my books. I've looked into it. I've thought about it. For a man, I don't want to complain about how unfair it is, but you could just kind of roll out of bed and step in front of the camera. But the thought of having to fix my hair and put on makeup to do quick little videos, I'm trying to find less things to do than more things to do. And so I really haven't taken advantage of it. But my goodness, when I look at your videos, which I think are fascinating, I seek them out. I watch them on LinkedIn. And so I go onto LinkedIn and look for them just so I can see what your daily message is. Again, I'm very interested in fraud type of cases. So it looks like it's really working for you. And I may have to just make myself get out there and do it, because it'd be a fun message to go on and just highlight for a minute some of the cases that have been case reviews on this podcast.
For the record, Jerry, I think you're camera ready. So if you ever decide to do that, it's going to be a huge hit. I like the idea. Again, the tough part for me is taking one of these long, kind of complicated financial fraud stories and trying to pare it down to a 1 or 1.5 minute story. That's the hard part, is editing it down into something that it will be useful, but you end up leaving out a lot of details, which is why I really welcomed the opportunity to come here to tell this long story about Perry Griggs.
Well, I really appreciate you accepting my invitation. I like to give my guest the last word. What would you like to say?
Well, I guess these days I'm feeling a little bit of heat from the public, especially in my comment section about all the controversies out there swirling regarding the FBI. I just think it's important for people to understand that those controversies, maybe there's some accuracy behind them, maybe there's not. It's not for me to say, but your average agent out there working cases is working hard for you, the American public. I just hope you can show some appreciation in your mind when you go out there to criticize the FBI based on something you saw on Fox News, to understand that the normal FBI agent is carrying a caseload of about a dozen cases, and they keep their nose down and their ego out of it. I have no idea how anyone's voting, but they're working hard for you day in, day out to make this a better country.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find a photo of Tom Simon, along with photos of subjects, Perry and Rochelle Griggs, and the billboards used as a tool to capture the fugitives. There's also a link to other FBI retired case file review episodes about Ponzi schemes and frauds. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.